I never imagined that a day like any other could turn into the darkest day of my life. Everything seemed normal, routine even until the moment it wasn't. You think you know someone completely, think you understand their thoughts, their desires, their secrets, but then reality crashes down, shattering every assumption you've ever made. The discovery of her betrayal hit me with a force so intense that it felt like my entire world had been rewritten in an instant. I had trusted her with my life, with my heart, with everything I believed was sacred between us. And in a single devastating revelation, I realized that trust had been nothing but an illusion. I remember the exact moment I stumbled upon the evidence. It wasn't something dramatic, not at first glance. It was subtle, small, almost innocuous details that whispered lies. Details that my mind at first refused to believe, tried to rationalize away, tried to convince myself were mistakes, coincidences, misunderstandings. But the deeper I looked, the clearer the truth became. The messages, the hidden accounts, the subtle lies she had woven into the fabric of our everyday life, they all pointed to one undeniable fact. She had been betraying me, right under my nose, and for how long I still couldn't fathom. The betrayal was not just emotional. It was a violation of the life we had built together, the promises we had exchanged, the intimacy we had shared. Every memory suddenly felt tainted, every laugh and tender moment rewritten by the shadow of deceit. I felt a mixture of disbelief and numbness at first, a hollow emptiness that made the world seem unreal, as if I were trapped in someone else's life, watching a story unfold that wasn't mine. My mind raced through questions I didn't want answers to. How could she do this? Was there anything I had done to push her away? Did she ever really love me, or had I been living in a meticulously crafted lie? The shock was overwhelming, like being submerged in freezing water and struggling for air. Like your very sense of reality had been stripped away. Every instinct screamed at me to confront her immediately, to demand explanations, to unleash the torrent of anger and betrayal that roared inside me. But shock has a way of paralyzing you, of turning every reaction into hesitation, every thought into confusion. I couldn't act, not yet. I couldn't trust what I was feeling because the feelings themselves were too raw, too jagged, slicing through my composure in unpredictable ways. I found myself revisiting every interaction, replaying every conversation in my mind, searching for the moment I should have seen the signs, the subtle shifts in behavior, the lies that now stood out like glaring neon lights. And with every memory, the shock deepened, because the realization hit me that the betrayal wasn't just a single act. It was an ongoing deception that had been carefully hidden, masked by familiarity, by routine, by the very love I had believed was real. The sense of disbelief morphed slowly into a strange kind of anger, sharp and bitter, a fire kindled by betrayal and nurtured by shock. My thoughts became consumed with the question of how I would respond, how I could reclaim the power that had been stolen from me. But even that plan was tangled with the rawness of emotion that refused to let me see clearly. I felt exposed, vulnerable in ways I had never experienced, and yet there was a simmering determination underneath the shock, a quiet voice whispering that I would not let this define me, that I could take control, that the betrayal would not go unanswered. The shock was a cruel teacher, forcing me to confront the fragility of trust, the hidden depths of deception, and the painful truth that sometimes, the people you hold closest are capable of unimaginable betrayal. Every mundane detail of our life together, once comforting, now carried the weight of suspicion. The home we shared, the routines we cherished, the little jokes and private moments, all were reframed in light of the betrayal, casting shadows over what I had once thought was happiness. I felt a wave of isolation, as if no one could truly understand the magnitude of what had happened, and at the same time a strange clarity emerged from the chaos, a recognition that the world had not ended, that I was still standing, and that there was a path forward, however dark and uncertain it seemed. And as I grappled with the initial shock, oscillating between disbelief, anger, sadness, and a nascent drive for justice, I realized that this moment, devastating as it was, marked the beginning of a transformation. The moment where my life, my choices, and my response to betrayal would define not only the story of what happened but the story of who I was becoming. The shock was not merely a reaction to what had occurred. It was the catalyst, the spark that ignited the process of turning pain into strategy, confusion into clarity, and betrayal into a force that could be confronted, exposed, and ultimately reversed. The moment the truth hit me, the floodgates of emotion opened in ways I never thought possible. Disbelief came first, a dizzying cloud that made everything around me seem unreal. As if I had woken up in someone else's life, trapped in a nightmare I could not escape. My mind kept replaying the evidence, the messages, the hidden details over and over again, refusing to accept what it was seeing. How could someone I had trusted so completely, someone I had loved so deeply, have turned against me in the most intimate and personal way imaginable? The heartbreak that followed was immediate and visceral, a weight pressing on my chest so heavy that even breathing felt like a monumental task. I could feel every memory I had shared with her twisting into betrayal, every promise of loyalty and love now cast in a bitter, mocking light. It wasn't just sadness, it was a profound sense of violation, the kind that shakes the foundations of who you are and what you believed in. Anger soon rose in waves, sharp and relentless, consuming every corner of my mind. It was the kind of anger that makes your hands clench without thought, that makes your stomach churn and your heart pound, a physical manifestation of the injustice done to me. I wanted to lash out, to scream, to confront her in a way that would leave no doubt about the depth of my pain and fury, but even that impulse was tangled with disbelief, a war between my desire for immediate retribution and the icy realization that I needed to act strategically. Each emotion fed into the other, forming a storm inside me. Heartbreak made the anger sharper, more bitter, while the anger intensified the heartbreak, turning every memory into a blade and every thought into fire. The disbelief lingered like a shadow over everything, preventing me from fully succumbing to either rage or despair, forcing me to process the reality of her betrayal in slow, torturous increments. I found myself oscillating between wanting to collapse entirely under the weight of grief, and wanting to rise up and make the world understand the magnitude of the wrong that had been done to me. Every interaction I had in the following days was colored by these emotions. Even mundane tasks felt impossible, because my mind was constantly circling back to her betrayal, analyzing every word she had ever said, every gesture, every moment of intimacy that now seemed tainted. I questioned everything I had thought I knew about our life together. Could I ever trust anyone again? Could I trust myself to read the people around me accurately? The anger often surprised me, erupting in unexpected moments, triggered by the smallest reminder of what had been lost. I would catch a glimpse of her face in my memory, hear her voice in my mind, and a visceral wave of fury would wash over me, leaving me trembling with the desire for confrontation, for answers, for justice. At the same time, the heartbreak was relentless, a quiet ache that never fully disappeared. It lingered in moments of silence, in the empty spaces where our laughter used to live, in the routines we once shared that now felt hollow and meaningless. The pain of loss intertwined with the betrayal, creating a unique torment that was as much mental as it was emotional. I would catch myself staring at our home, our possessions, our shared life, and feeling a strange combination of nostalgia, anger, and grief. The disbelief was perhaps the cruelest companion of all, whispering that none of this could be real, that somehow there had been a mistake, that perhaps I had misunderstood, misread, misinterpreted. But every piece of evidence, every detail, every calculated lie she had woven into our relationship confirmed that the nightmare was real, that my emotions were justified, and that my response needed to be deliberate. I realized that these emotions, anger, heartbreak, disbelief, were not just reactions, they were fuel. They were fire in my veins, sharpening my mind, focusing my thoughts, preparing me for the actions I would need to take. The heartbreak forced me to reflect, to understand the depth of the betrayal and the pain it caused, while the anger gave me energy, motivation, and clarity to plan, to strategize, to ensure that the scales of justice were balanced in my favor. Disbelief, as torturous as it was, kept me alert, forcing me to question every assumption, verify every detail, and never act rashly. I began to understand that being consumed by emotion did not mean being powerless. On the contrary, it meant that I could channel this overwhelming force into something meaningful, something that would restore not just my dignity, but also my sense of control over a life that had been so violently upended. Every sleepless night, every tear, every moment of rage and despair became a step toward reclaiming my power, toward transforming the chaos of emotion into a carefully orchestrated response that would ensure the world. And she understood the consequences of betrayal. And as I navigated this storm of feelings, I began to see patterns, motives, weaknesses, and opportunities, the emotional tumult sharpening my instincts, honing my judgment, and preparing me for the inevitable confrontation, exposure, and the viral reckoning that would follow. After the initial shock and the overwhelming surge of anger and heartbreak, I knew that acting impulsively would only give her the advantage. Every instinct screamed for immediate confrontation, for raw emotion to be unleashed, but I realized quickly that letting those impulses rule me would be a mistake. The key to turning this betrayal into something meaningful wasn't in reacting. It was in strategizing, in taking careful, deliberate steps that would allow me to regain control of the situation and ultimately turn the tables. I started by sitting in silence, alone, reflecting on what had happened, trying to separate the torrent of emotion from the rational thought that would guide my next moves. I analyzed every detail of her betrayal, every lie, every manipulation, every inconsistency in her story, and I cataloged them meticulously in my mind. I knew that if I acted without preparation, her deception could continue to hide behind charm, deflection, or her own manipulative tactics, but if I planned carefully, I could expose her with precision, leaving no room for doubt or denial. Planning my response became almost an obsession. I created mental maps of the situation, identifying her weaknesses, understanding her patterns, and imagining every possible reaction she might have. I anticipated the way she could deflect blame, the arguments she might use, and the way she could attempt to manipulate public perception, because this wasn't just about personal confrontation, it was about making the truth undeniable, visible to anyone who needed to see it. I forced myself to slow down, to breathe, to resist the temptation to act on pure emotion, because I understood that the most devastating revenge is not chaotic. It is calculated, deliberate, and unstoppable. I began to document everything meticulously, gathering evidence, screenshots, messages, recordings, anything that could substantiate the betrayal beyond any doubt. Every detail mattered. Every piece of proof was enough. Treated each one with care, knowing that it could make the difference between being dismissed as emotional or being recognized as having uncovered an undeniable truth. I also considered the timing of my actions. I knew that revealing everything too soon, while the emotions were still raw and volatile, could backfire, making me appear reckless or vindictive rather than justified. Patience became a weapon in itself. I waited for the right moment, the moment when the evidence, the circumstances, and the audience would all align perfectly to maximize the impact of the exposure. I created scenarios in my mind, imagining how different people, friends, family, even strangers would react to each piece of information, and I adjusted my plan accordingly. I thought about the social media impact, the viral potential, and the way public perception could amplify the consequences of her actions, because in a world where visibility equals power, making her betrayal public in the right way would not only be satisfying but also irrefutable. Planning also meant controlling my own behavior. I learned to mask my emotions, to appear calm and composed in her presence, to hide the storm that raged inside me. I understood that any sign of impatience or emotional volatility could alert her to my intentions, giving her time to cover her tracks or manipulate the narrative. I practiced neutrality, precision in my words, and careful observation, so that when the moment came I could strike with full force and clarity. Every interaction became a study in psychology and strategy. I watched her closely, noting how she responded to stress, how she tried to manipulate perceptions, and how she interacted with others. I learned to anticipate her moves before she made them, to stay several steps ahead, because the most effective revenge is not reactive. It is preemptive, designed to leave no room for escape or denial. Planning my response also meant preparing for the aftermath. I considered how people were narrative, leaving her unable to rewrite history or evade responsibility. It was a meticulous process, a balance of patience, foresight, and emotional control, and it required me to harness every ounce of clarity I could muster. I had to transform the raw, chaotic energy of betrayal into a precise, strategic plan that would allow me to reveal the truth in a way that was undeniable, unforgettable, and most importantly, fair in its execution. I reminded myself constantly that impulsive acts fueled by anger could provide temporary satisfaction, but would ultimately diminish the power of the exposure. True revenge, the kind that resonates and lingers, is calculated, disciplined, and executed with foresight. By planning my response carefully, I was not only reclaiming control over a situation that had spiraled out of my hands, but I was also preparing to expose her in a way that would be remembered, shared, and recognized by everyone as the undeniable truth of the betrayal. This process of planning without acting impulsively became a lesson in self-mastery, in turning the intensity of emotion into clarity of action, and in preparing for the moment when the truth could no longer be hidden. It was in this careful preparation, this deliberate strategy, that I found a sense of power returning to me, a feeling that the tables were ready to turn, and that the betrayal that had once left me feeling helpless and devastated would soon become a story of justice, revelation, and undeniable consequence. Once I had calmed the initial storm of shock and emotion and committed to planning my response strategically, the next step was clear. I needed undeniable proof. The betrayal had to be documented meticulously, in a way that left no room for doubt or denial. I couldn't rely on memory, on words spoken in anger, or on the assumptions that had driven my initial suspicions. I needed tangible evidence, something that could be presented with clarity, precision, and impact. The process of gathering evidence became an obsession, a mission that consumed every thought and every moment of my waking hours. I began by retracing every interaction, every conversation, every unusual behavior that had seemed insignificant at the time. What I had once brushed off as harmless secrecy now took on a sinister significance. I revisited phone messages, emails, and social media interactions, each one a potential piece of the puzzle that could reveal the full scope of the betrayal. I created folders, charts, and timelines in my mind, mapping out connections, inconsistencies, and deliberate lies. Every screenshot, every recording, every subtle hint of deception was carefully preserved, organized, and cross-referenced. I was building a dossier that would leave nothing to chance, a record so comprehensive that denial would be impossible. While gathering this evidence, I had to maintain the appearance of normalcy in our daily life. She could not suspect that I was aware, that I had uncovered her lies, that I was carefully documenting every misstep. This required patience and discipline beyond what I had ever imagined I could possess. Every interaction had to be controlled, every word measured, so that she remained unaware of the storm quietly brewing beneath the surface. The act of documenting the truth also involved understanding the psychology of betrayal. I needed to know not just what had been done but why, how, and when. Every inconsistency in her story became a thread to pull, every lie. Emotionally draining and almost unbearable. Each discovery of deceit, each hidden interaction, each manipulation she had orchestrated, reopened wounds I had hoped were healing. But I reminded myself that this was not just about revenge. It was about justice, clarity, and reclaiming the truth that had been stolen from me. As I built this record, I also considered the ways in which it would be presented. The raw evidence alone could be powerful, but the context, the sequencing, and the narrative framing would determine its full impact. I began to think like a storyteller and a strategist at once, imagining the reactions of those who would witness the exposure, anticipating questions, doubts, and objections, and preparing the evidence in a way that addressed every one of them. Technology became my ally. I used every tool at my disposal to preserve conversations, capture hidden messages, and track patterns of deceit. I learned the intricacies of digital investigation, how to retrieve information that had been deleted, and how to maintain a secure record that could not be tampered with. Each step of the process increased my confidence, transforming my sense of helplessness into empowerment. The act of documenting the truth was not just practical, it was symbolic. Every screenshot, every recording, every compiled piece of evidence was a statement that I was no longer a passive victim. I was a witness, a recorder of reality, and a force preparing to hold her accountable in a way that would be undeniable and permanent. Even in the quiet moments, when the emotional weight of the betrayal threatened to overwhelm me, the process of gathering evidence gave me focus, purpose, and a sense of control. It was a methodical, deliberate process that required patience, precision, and perseverance, and each completed task, each verified piece of proof, brought me closer to the moment when the full truth could be revealed. As I documented the betrayal, I began to see the full picture, with maximum effect. Gathering evidence was no longer just a task, it became a mission, a disciplined pursuit of truth and justice that transformed the chaos of betrayal into a carefully constructed path toward revelation, consequence, and vindication. Every detail mattered, every observation was recorded, and every truth preserved, preparing the stage for the ultimate act that would expose her deception in a way that was both undeniable and unforgettable. After days of planning, gathering evidence, and preparing myself mentally and emotionally, the moment finally arrived. The culmination of sleepless nights, meticulous documentation, and careful strategy was now within reach. I had rehearsed every scenario, anticipated every reaction, and ensured that nothing could go wrong. It was not just about confronting her. It was about revealing the full truth in a way that could not be ignored, doubted, or dismissed. The exposure had to be precise, impactful, and undeniable. I remember the exact moment I executed my plan. It was almost surreal, a strange mix of adrenaline, fear, and determination coursing through me as I took the first step. Every detail I had meticulously prepared was at my disposal. The messages, the recordings, the hidden interactions, all organized and ready to present in a way that left no room for denial. As I shared the evidence publicly, I watched reactions unfold in real time. Shock, disbelief, anger, and curiosity rippled through everyone who saw it. People who had known us, who had assumed the facade of our happy relationship was real, were suddenly confronted with the undeniable truth. The initial shock mirrored what I had felt when I first discovered her betrayal. But this time I was in control, directing the flow, managing the impact, and witnessing the power of truth unleashed. The viral spread of the revelation was something I had anticipated but never fully imagined. Within hours, shares, comments, and messages flooded social media platforms. The story resonated with people because it was raw, real, and visceral. Betrayal is a universal emotion, and the way I exposed it struck a chord with countless others who had faced similar pain. Every reaction, every post, every message became a reinforcement of the strategy one had so carefully executed. The reach was beyond anything I could have predicted. Strangers, acquaintances, and even friends of friends engaged with the story, amplifying it across platforms. The exposure became not just a personal vindication, but a public reckoning. The thrill of watching the truth spread was intoxicating. I felt a sense of power, a reclamation of control that I had lost during the initial betrayal. It was no longer just about me confronting her. It was about the world recognizing the injustice, the deception, and the calculated way in which it had been executed. The viral impact also brought a complex mix of satisfaction and reflection. I saw people analyzing the evidence, debating the situation, and drawing conclusions, and each interaction reinforced that my approach had been methodical and precise. I had not acted out of raw emotion alone. I had created a narrative supported by undeniable proof, and the world was responding exactly as planned. Yet, amidst the satisfaction, there was an undeniable emotional weight. The exposure was devastating not only for her but for me as well. Reliving the betrayal publicly, even with evidence in hand, forced me to confront the pain all over again. But the difference was that I was no longer powerless. I had transformed vulnerability into strength, heartbreak into strategy, and deception into undeniable truth. Sensationalized, it was factual, organized, and undeniable, and that is what made it resonate. The public attention added another layer of consequence to the act of betrayal, ensuring that her actions could no longer be hidden or dismissed. I observed the subtle changes in how she interacted, the way she reacted to messages and comments, the realization slowly dawning that the carefully constructed life she had hidden behind was now unraveling in front of everyone. The power dynamics had shifted completely. I was no longer the victim, I was the orchestrator of truth, and the viral spread of the exposure reinforced that. Every share, every comment, every discussion became a testament to the effectiveness of preparation, patience, and calculated action. People began to share their own stories, reflecting on the universality of betrayal and the cathartic release of seeing justice served. In many ways, the virality turned my personal pain into a broader narrative about trust, deception, and accountability. It was a reminder that meticulous planning, emotional control, and unwavering focus could transform a moment of devastating betrayal into a story of empowerment. The exposure also taught me about the reach of truth and the way it resonates when presented authentically and with irrefutable evidence. The satisfaction of watching the narrative unfold exactly as I had envisioned was profound. I felt the culmination of every emotional, strategic, and tactical choice I had made leading up to this moment. Anger had been transformed into clarity, heartbreak into strategy, and disbelief into methodical action. The viral nature of the revelation did more than just punish her. It validated my approach, confirmed my strength and demonstrated that betrayal, no matter how hidden, could be confronted with precision, strategy, and undeniable truth. The reactions, the attention, and the spread of the story reinforced a simple yet powerful lesson. When truth is wielded with careful st. After the storm of shock, heartbreak, planning, and execution, the dust eventually settled, leaving me with a mixture of reflection, clarity, and understanding that could only come from experiencing betrayal and taking control of the aftermath. The first lesson was painfully obvious. Trust is fragile, and it must be earned, observed, and maintained, never assumed. I had once believed that love alone was sufficient to secure loyalty, that devotion guaranteed honesty, and that intimacy created inviolable bonds. Betrayal shattered that illusion, leaving me to confront the uncomfortable truth that even those closest to us can act in ways that defy logic, morality, and expectation. But the second lesson, the one that emerged through strategy and careful action, was equally powerful. The way we respond to betrayal defines us far more than the betrayal itself. I realized that acting impulsively, letting anger dictate every choice, might have offered temporary satisfaction, but it would have left me weakened, vulnerable, and ultimately powerless. Instead, by taking time to plan, observe, and document, I transformed my pain into a tool for clarity and action, reclaiming authority over a situation that had threatened to consume me. There was also a lesson in patience and timing, a reminder that the most effective consequences are not those delivered in haste, but those that are calculated, precise, and unavoidable. The exposure of her betrayal and the way it spread was not simply an act of revenge. It was a demonstration of strategic power, a controlled response that amplified the truth while leaving no room for denial or deflection. In this process, I discovered something unexpected about myself: resilience. I had always considered myself strong, but true strength revealed itself not in moments of comfort, but in moments of crisis. It was the ability to endure emotional chaos, to think clearly under pressure, and to convert despair into purposeful action. That defined my resilience. Every sleepless night spent documenting evidence, every moment of controlled observation, every interaction where I masked my emotions became proof that I could survive devastation and emerge not broken, but empowered. Another lesson emerged in the power of transparency and truth. In a world where lies can be hidden behind charm, manipulation, or social conventions, the revelation of truth carries immense weight. By ensuring that my exposure was grounded in undeniable evidence, I harnessed the inherent authority of truth itself. The reaction of others, the viral spread, the validation, the discussions it sparked, was a reminder that truth resonates universally, and that the consequences of deception extend far beyond private realms. This taught me to respect the force of honesty, to wield it with precision, and to understand that even in personal betrayal, public awareness can serve as a form of accountability and empowerment. There was also a deeply personal lesson in self-reliance. While betrayal often leaves one questioning their worth, their judgment, and their capacity for discernment, I discovered that reclaiming power requires leaning on inner strength rather than external validation. The meticulous planning, strategic observation, and careful execution of the exposure were not only acts of justice, they were affirmations that I was capable of navigating complexity, mastering emotion, and creating outcomes that reflected intelligence and integrity, rather than impulsive vengeance. In addition, I learned the value of emotional mastery. Betrayal has a way of amplifying every feeling, turning anger into obsession, heartbreak into paralysis, and disbelief into destructive doubt. But by channeling these emotions into focused action, I discovered that what once threatened to overwhelm me could become fuel for clarity, discipline, and purposeful execution. The fire of anger, the sting of heartbreak, and the haze of disbelief became instruments I could shape and direct, rather than letting them consume me entirely. Revenge, when approached with strategy and precision, is not merely about punishment, it is about reclamation. The act of exposing her betrayal, documenting the evidence, and sharing it in a way that could not be ignored was less about hurting her and more about reclaiming the narrative, asserting control, and reaffirming my dignity. This understanding transformed my perception of power. True power does not lie in chaos or emotional eruption, but in deliberate, focused action that aligns with principle and purpose. Another important lesson was in perspective. The virality of the exposure, the reactions it generated, And the ripple effect it created were reminders that personal experiences often carry universal resonance. Betrayal, dishonesty, and deception are not isolated phenomena. They are human experiences that touch many. By confronting it openly and strategically, I learned that personal justice can also become a catalyst for broader awareness, conversation, and understanding. Finally, I realized that reclaiming power after betrayal is an ongoing process. Exposure and public vindication are milestones, but the deeper transformation occurs internally. It is in the ability to regain confidence, trust oneself, and approach life with renewed clarity that true reclamation takes place. I learned to identify red flags, to trust my instincts, to observe carefully, and to act deliberately. I discovered that empowerment is rooted not in revenge alone, but in self-awareness, resilience, and the disciplined application of strategy, patience, and emotional mastery. Every step of this journey, from shock, heartbreak, and anger to planning, documentation, exposure, and viral validation, taught me that betrayal, while devastating, is also a teacher. It reveals weakness, exposes strength, and challenges us to reclaim authority over our lives. The lessons I drew from this experience were not just about punishing deception, but about understanding human behavior, harnessing emotional energy, and mastering the tools of strategy, patience, and self-empowerment. They taught me that power is reclaimed not through chaos, but through clarity, that justice is most potent when precise, and that true strength lies in transforming the raw pain of betrayal into purposeful, undeniable action that reshapes the narrative, restores dignity, and asserts control over both personal and public perception.